Hello, everybody. I'm Johnny Bowman, the president of the Harvard College Undergraduate Council.
Welcome, everyone. I am Pukhar Malla, a student at the Harvard Kennedy School from Nepal. I am the president of the Harvard Graduate Council.
Charlie Gibson is the Reedy Fellow at the Shorenstein Center at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. As a broadcast television anchor and journalist at ABC, he covered the White House and Congress through 11 election cycles. He has anchored for World News with Peter Jennings, Nightline, 2020, and World News This Morning. He also hosted Good Morning America for 15 years. From 2006 to 2009, he anchored World News with Charlie Gibson. He also moderated the second presidential debate between President Bush and Senator Kerry in 2004, as well as the Democratic Party's presidential election debate between Secretary Clinton and President Obama. Finally, Charlie Gibson topped off his career as the news director from Princeton College's student-run radio station.
On behalf of the Harvard Graduate Council and the student presidents of all 12 grad schools, I am honored to introduce President Drew Faust. I remember reading of her appointment when she took office in 2007 as Harvard's 28th president. I was especially excited because she went to Bryn Mawr College, which is part of the tri-college community that my own alma mater, Swarthmore, also belongs to. A historian of the Civil War and the American South, her study and writing are groundbreaking. As the first dean of the Radcliffe Institute, she transformed a college into a world-class institute for advanced study. She led the university through very difficult financial times with a sense of purpose and possibility towards a unified Harvard. And every day, she continues to act on a belief that universities can play a pivotal role in shaping the future of student curiosities as well as the world. Her leadership inspires the entire Harvard community.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gibson and President Faust.
The examination papers will be passed out among you right now. Good afternoon. As I think you just heard, I'm Charlie Gibson. I'm currently a Shorenstein Fellow at the Kennedy School, and for many years before that, a lot of years before that, I worked for ABC News. In the course of that work, I had the opportunity to interview the last 7 presidents of the United States. And once on Good Morning America, I even interviewed Neil Rudenstein, the president of Harvard. Those presidents all had one thing in common. They were male, which makes today even better. When, you can applaud that if you want. When Drew Gilpin Faust's office heard that I was going to be here for a semester, they contacted me, and I learned that President Faust in some way communicates with the university-wide community every fall. I gather that's been done in the past by email and by letter. Last year a speech, and this year they said she would like to do an interview, and would I like to come to Sanders and have a dialogue with her in front of many from the university. And I simply said, are all issues on the table? And they said without hesitation, sure. And so that brings us to today. I'm delighted, by the way, that we have so many people here. I'm told there were many more requests for tickets than there are seats in the auditorium. You never tire of good ratings when you come from television. We have some recorded introductory remarks from some of the Harvard deans. As an outsider, I must say, you have a lot of deans around here. And then President Faust and I are going to talk for some time. And we will also later take questions from all of you, and we're also soliciting questions over the web. If you want to write a question down on a card, there are ushers, I think, around with cards, and they'll be passed up, and some of those questions will be projected up here on the screen. And the same thing is true of questions that come in over the internet. during the course of the time that we're talking. So, with that, let's begin with the Harvard deans.
I think all of the hardest public problems in the world cross boundaries. They cross the boundaries between business and government and civil society. They also cross geographic and intellectual boundaries. And Greater Harvard, with its remarkable focus on excellence, the quality of the students, the things that we care about, brings together those unbelievable resources.
Often, because we're on the other side of the river, people think of us as an island unto ourselves that is not engaged with the university in any ways. But we have the most joint programs. We are far more involved in many ways in collaborating with the university and doing things with the university than people might imagine. We have 5 joint programs in our PhD programs. We have joint programs, MBA, MD, MBA, JD, a joint program with the Kennedy School, a joint program that we're now thinking of even with the Design School.
And being part of such an amazing research university makes a huge difference because it lets us really work with so many other colleagues in collaboration. It's very important for us to be able to work with the School of Public Health, with the medical school, with engineering, with the humanities. This is something that really makes our work much more transformative.
Our product is knowledge. And we have a single process with 3 phases, but they're not separate missions. We're engaged in the production of knowledge, that's research. We're engaged in the reproduction of knowledge, that's education, because good education doesn't just transmit knowledge, it recreates knowledge in the minds of the next generation. And then alongside production and reproduction of knowledge, we are engaged in the translation of knowledge. That's the third part of that cycle of knowledge.
Our programs enable scholars, scientists, and artists to take risks. In fact, they encourage them to take risks, to cross boundaries, to break through barriers at the very frontiers of what we know and what we're able to do. Our goal is to be a catalyst for the creative encounters that change ways of thinking, change perspectives, lead to new insights, new understandings, seeding innovation.
Harvard is incredibly innovative, very entrepreneurial, and we have spun out a very large number of companies. Pretty much everyone knows that Microsoft came out of Harvard, so did Facebook. We are teaching T-shaped individuals at C's. That means they have a deep knowledge of one part of engineering, and the top of the T is the ability to move across and integrate across disciplines.
I find that the quality of the students just gets better and better, and that's really very exciting to see people coming in with a variety of different goals in mind. They come in for such diverse reasons and with such diverse backgrounds, and part of that is what is exciting about it because they teach each other. Students probably learn as much from each other because of their diversity and their excellence and their divergent experiences.
I love the students. The students are extraordinary. Their vision, their dreams, what they accomplish. You know, we have graduates who now are 6 members of the United States Supreme Court. We have the President of the United States. We have the Chief Justice of the South African Constitutional Court. To participate in educating and learning alongside these extraordinary people is truly a privilege.
We've been thinking a lot about how to make sure that students who are interested in health problems, who are studying in the arts and sciences, can make great contacts at the School of Public Health and the medical school, that students who are interested in human rights problems at the law school can relate to philosophers in our philosophy department. And I think the future of great universities will really depend on their agility to make these kinds of strong intellectual and scholarly connections across and among their schools and their faculties and among their students especially.
We exist as a professional school to work with and to help improve the education sector. I think it's also fair to say that at the Ed School we all believe that education is the civil rights issue of our time.
Our biggest change in the curriculum today is our new program in general education. It's probably our most innovative experience in terms of the kinds of techniques that you'll see being applied in the classroom to help our students understand the material, engage with the material, make sure that the material is bridging between the different disciplines and not just narrow visions of a particular discipline, but really looking at how the students can take the information that they're learning and apply it in today's world.
The new curriculum, I think, is going incredibly well. The students have responded to it with great enthusiasm. I think professors are now really interested in revamping older courses they have, increasing use of new technologies, thinking about their subjects in new ways. I would encourage anyone to take a look at the course trailers that are up on the general education website. They're sort of short little course commercials, but they really give a flavor of what people are trying to accomplish in their classrooms. And many of them are creative and innovative, and some of them are just absolutely hysterically funny.
We are reorganizing and repositioning some of our core academic departments to be more able to respond to the exciting opportunities in science today. We're building and strengthening other initiatives that are at the leading edge of science, such as stem cells and bioengineering. We're creating greater capacity in the ability to translate medical advances into therapeutic reality through the Harvard Catalyst. And we're also on the verge of a major new initiative in primary care education, research, and leadership.
People might look at our famously decentralized schools and units and might not realize how truly collaborative the faculty is, whether it's about teaching or research. I mean, people here want to do the best possible research, the best possible thinking and writing, the best possible pedagogy, and often that involves engagement with colleagues, whether in different departments or schools or disciplines. And it just happens as a matter of course and very, very easily at Harvard.
Being a part of the Harvard community is just, I think, in the most profound way about being in a world where knowledge and access to knowledge is so highly valued, where there's such a commitment to excellence, and there's such a commitment to creating a community of scholars, a community of people who are performing at their very best because of their deep commitment to the production of knowledge.
Being part of Harvard means three things: innovation, creativity, and community. Innovation in the way our faculty and students come up with new ways of thinking, new ways of doing. Creativity, both within the classroom as well as outside the classroom, the incredible range of activities that our students and faculty undertake. And then finally, community, which I think is one of the most important aspects of being within the Faculty of Arts and Sciences as part of the larger university.
What I like most about being dean is that Harvard provides you with quite a platform to try to change the world.
Everyone who comes to Kennedy School has this naive notion that they can make the world a better place and it's their responsibility to do so. So I get to be dean of one of the largest group of incredibly smart, naive people in the world, and they make it work, and they succeed day after day.
One of the housemasters relayed to me a comment from a student who had just returned to campus and said to her that it was wonderful to be back home, and I think that sums up very nicely what it means to be part of the larger Harvard community.
President Faust, let's start with money. The university endowment in value was up 11% last year after being down 27+% the year before. You out of the woods?
I'm not sure what out of the woods means. I think that we are in a good place as compared to a year ago. We've obviously turned a corner. We feel very optimistic about where we're going. But if we look at where our endowment is, it's still substantially lower than it was 2 years ago. If you mean by out of the woods, have we adjusted to these changed realities? I think in that sense, absolutely so, in that we have defined our situation in these new circumstances. And for a while, I think we were responding to necessities imposed on us unexpectedly. The spring of 2009, when, as you recall, I'm sure you were telling us every night, it's probably you whose lips I heard it from quite often, we were in a kind of national and international freefall. No one really knew where the ground was going to be. And so as we moved through that winter, we were trying to understand where we needed to be and how we would position ourselves to cope with a highly unexpected and volatile future. As the economy has grounded out a little bit and we see a more stable situation, we've been able to turn some of those necessities into opportunities and use what we saw and what we learned in ways to strengthen the institution.
Well, as I've read about the university, I see the financial crisis, quote unquote, blamed or credited, I think blamed, for almost everything. From salary limitations to the construction of the Alston campus to hot breakfast. So let's take them in order of importance. Can you resume hot breakfast?
I am so delighted to have this hot breakfast question. I have been waiting for this. Mr. Gibson saw Shirley Tillman make fun of hot breakfast on the platform at Princeton commencement this year as I sat not far from him. And I was not speaking at that time, but I'm delighted now to have the subject raised again. And I'm delighted because, in a way, hot breakfast is a symbol of how we tried to handle the challenges before us. And let me explain that. What we tried to do was sort out what are the essential parts of who we are and what we think a university needs to do. And those essential parts were teaching and scholarship. They were financial aid. They were protecting our ability to attract talent. And so we said, what could we do without? And so we thought one of the things that is not essential is having cooked-to-order scrambled eggs in 12 different locations every morning. A person could go to Annenberg any morning and get a hot breakfast, or in his or her own house have quite a delicious breakfast that includes hot oatmeal, hot toast, hard-boiled eggs. I have gone and eaten this, and it's very good, much better than what I get at home. And most of our undergraduates don't even get up to eat breakfast. So we thought, in the great scheme of the world, hot breakfast was in the dispensable category rather than the essential category.
So I take it we're not resuming hot breakfast. The Alston campus. Again, everything I read talking about how it was critical to the mission of Harvard, to the future of Harvard. What's the timetable on it now?
Alston is critical to the future of Harvard, and it provides us with a marvelous set of opportunities. As we look at our peer institutions, many of them are looking to expand. Columbia, as you know, is expanding into Morningside Heights. Penn is expanding down towards the Schuylkill River. But their ability to expand is much more constrained than what we are able ultimately to do in our Alston properties. And those properties are right next to us. They are right in the middle of a vibrant city, and they are going to be Harvard's future. But it's going to come, it's a future that's going to come much more slowly than it might have had financial circumstances not changed.
What's much more slowly? Is there a timetable now?
We don't have a definite timetable. We're undertaking 3 separate, different kinds of initiatives in Alston right now. One is leasing properties that we have and improving our stewardship within the neighborhood. Another is a series of programs for the neighborhood which involve the educational portal, the building of a park, other kinds of activities in the community to green the community. And the third is a set of explorations being undertaken by a work team that is led by my Executive Vice President, Katie Lapp, and involves deans and experts in urban development from our alumni body. And it's led also by 3 faculty members who come from the design school, the business school, and a former head of the Institute of Politics, the former mayor of Nashville. And we are looking at what our options are, what kinds of co-development we might imagine, how to re-envision what we are going to be doing in Alston.
Do you envision a co-developer?
It's a possibility. I think it is.
How strong?
I think it's a strong possibility. And that's one of the set of questions that this group is asking.
An example of who might be a co-developer?
We have envisioned Alston as a place for very exciting science. Let's imagine that we were doing some science, university science, and that we had biotech nearby, that we possibly had some kinds of companies, drug companies or others that wanted to be in the area, that we had other kinds of private research endeavors, possibly foundation, others who could be partners, which I think will make ultimately for a very vibrant community and a set of intersections that will be very lively and synergistic for all involved.
If you bring in for-profit companies, does that change the nature of Alston for good or for ill?
I think as we develop relationships of this sort, we're going to want to be very careful about issues like intellectual property and to maintain the ideals and principles that animate university research. On the other hand, I think 50 years from now, if we have a community in Alston that includes a variety of different kinds of enterprises, that will be an energizing force.
With the turnaround of 11% this year compared to 27% negative last year, can you get back to hiring new, perhaps more diverse faculty, or get back to greater normalcy in raises?
We have continued to hire faculty throughout the downturn. We did not have a freeze on faculty hiring. We will be very careful about how we replace and when we replace, because compensation costs are our greatest cost overall. But we have, over the last decade, increased our faculty significantly, about 20%, for example, in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And so as we assess where we are and what our needs are, we will continue to grow, but we will try to do so very carefully and very deliberately.
Reading the Harvard Crimson in 2004, 6 years ago, a quote, "Planning is underway for the most ambitious capital campaign in the history of higher education." That was 6 years ago. You should be done with your planning by now.
A lot has happened at Harvard since 2004, and as you know, capital campaigns are quite tied to presidential leadership. And when I arrived as president in 2007, it was a very high item on my agenda to begin planning for a capital campaign that I would lead. A few things happened along the way, and I think that 2008, 2009 was not a good year to move very rapidly and ambitiously towards a capital campaign, but we are now back in that planning mode. We are making great progress. We had a retreat of all those deans this summer working on setting priorities for the campaign, and so we are moving forward with this. You are right that Harvard has been out of campaign for an extremely long period of time in comparison to our peers and what is customary.
So this is your 4th year. It is tied to presidential terms. So when does it start? And then the other question, how much?
Those are questions that we are assessing right now as we develop our plans. To answer that question, how much, that is a big question that is always addressed in the quiet planning phase of a campaign, because it's customary to go out and talk to donors about how excited they are about the priorities you're beginning to develop, and based on that to make some assessments of what you think a reasonable goal for a campaign might be. So we are doing that, but we're also doing that in a changed environment for philanthropy. And so I think we need to be very attentive to what we hear as we do these investigations of feasibility for the campaign, because as philanthropy changes, we have to take that into account as we set our campaign goals.
The last campaign in today's dollars would be $3.3 billion. I presume this drive would be larger? How much?
We don't know yet. I'm not hiding something from you, I just don't have a number.
Campaigns do begin in a quiet phase. Mm-hmm. You can tell us that there is not a quiet phase now underway?
Well, a quiet phase is a phase of planning. It's a phase of beginning to identify goals. It's a phase of beginning to identify donors. And so we're moving into that arena, and we're very excited about the opportunities that a campaign gives us to work together, this group at the Dean's Retreat, to say, what does the university want? Who are we? How do we envision our future? And that's where we are now.
If you're simply waiting for better economic times, you may have to wait some time.
We are not doing that. We just want to pitch our goals appropriately for the world in which we are now located.
Harvard students get grants. not loans. Harvard students graduate without debt. What percentage of the entering class of 2014 is receiving financial aid?
60% of the freshman class is receiving financial aid.
And what's the average grant?
The average grant is above $40,000. It's about $40,900, I believe.
Is that sustainable?
That is sustainable because we believe that this is really the most important part of being a university, is to attract talent, and to attract talent from whatever economic circumstance it may come. And so this has been a very deep commitment on our part.
That's a staggering number to most people, that with a tuition of what, $50,000 or overall expenses $50,000 plus, that the average grant is 80% of that.
You know, there's another way to think about it that I think is almost as stunning, which is if you look at our students on financial aid, the average amount that those families pay is just over $11,000, $11,500. So for financial aid students, the price of Harvard on average is that. And then another way to look at it is to look at the composition of our undergraduate student body and how that's changed in terms of its financial economic origins over the last decade or so. Currently in the freshman class, almost 20%, I think it's 18% of that class comes from families with incomes below $60,000 a year. So they're paying no familial contribution. So this is really a transformation in the nature of our commitment as a university. And I think it's one that is appropriate for higher education to emphasize and commit itself to.
So when I say, is that sustainable, I gather your answer is essentially, it has to be.
Yes.
And that is an absolute firm commitment of this university.
We must maintain our commitment to attracting students from the widest range of economic backgrounds based on talent and ability.
It strikes me that you took one job and you got another. The fact that you had to deal with the financial exigencies of our time. And that forced you perhaps into a presidency that has been reactive for the first years of your time here, as opposed to being proactive, as I suspect most presidents would like to be. I remember George Bush 41, never liked the question about that vision thing, and I gather you don't much either. But if there were one thing now, as you think about it, that you would like to come out of your presidency, one fundamental change that you could make, what would it be?
Can I respond to your notion that I took one job and inherited another as I moved
It's your college.
towards
You do what you want.
answering your question? People say that to me a lot, as if I had some kind of contract for the kind of job that I was entering into. And I guess I'd been around universities long enough, my whole adult life, to know that universities are always filled with surprises. And that's one of the wonderful things about them. But when I took this job, it was a little like getting married. You know, you do it for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. And so I've always thought, what are the opportunities inherent in where I find myself? What is the hand I've been dealt? How do you make the most of that? I once wrote a book called Mothers of Invention, and that, of course, is a reference to the idea of necessity as the mother of invention. And I felt not that I was, or that Harvard had to be reactive during the crisis, though of course it did have to react to what was going on, but rather that it had an opportunity in that necessity to find invention. And that's been the mode that I've tried to bring to what I face. Now, what would I want, second part of your question, what would I want to say about this institution? One thing, when I was done, it would relate very closely to what we were just talking about. I would like people to feel that Harvard was open to them, that the boundaries that might separate them from what Harvard has to offer had been significantly broken down during my presidency. That access to Harvard, a sense of feeling welcome at Harvard would have been enhanced. that also boundaries within Harvard would have been broken down, be they the boundaries between schools, between groups, and that we be able to take advantage of talent in the world and talent within our world in a way that would be without barrier.
And one of the things you have talked about is wanting Harvard to be one university, which fits in with that theme you're just talking about. When did Harvard presidents start talking about one university?
Well, I attended an exhibition that was put up in the archives, Harvard University archives, in honor of my installation in the fall of 2007. And I was looking at all the exhibitions, and there was a letter from Charles William Eliot, who was president between 1869 and 1909. And this letter said, at last we are one university. We have a single calendar, and now we can all the schools can act together. And I looked upon this and thought, oh no. But as I thought more about it, I thought to myself, I can make this happen in a way Charles William Eliot could not, because I'm dealing with a different world. I'm dealing with a world where knowledge has changed, where the physical sciences and life sciences are no longer separate undertakings. There's bioengineering. There are all these ways in which they intersect with one another, in which someone in the Kennedy School needs someone in the engineering school just to be able to figure out how to make change in Nepal. And so knowledge and the appetite of our students and faculty are on my side. All I have to do is clear the debris so that they can do what they want to do. So instead of facing mountains the way I think Charles William Eliot did, I simply have to get our feet untangled so we can do what everyone is pushing for and wants to see happen.
There was an interesting phrase in there, the attitudes of faculty are on my side. Faculties, with all due respect, can be a querulous lot. And I have talked to a number of faculty members here just about this one concept. Because as I come here, I see this as a balkanized institution. I'm looking at this from outside Princeton experience. We're almost entirely an undergraduate-oriented institution. And you have so many different constituencies here in different colleges. And many of the professors, when I say, well, President Faust is committed to one university, and they chuckle, and they say, good luck. So why are you so confident?
Why am I so confident?
Yep.
Well, one of the reasons I'm so confident are this extraordinary group of deans that you have just seen on the screen, and their belief in that, and their understanding of, and this is something Michael Porter said to my deans in the summer of 2007, how does being part of Harvard give you an unfair advantage? In other words, they can be a better law school, a better business school, a better design school, if they leverage the rest of Harvard to enhance what they can do. So their self-interest ultimately is invested in this, and they are a magnificent leadership team that I'm very proud to work with, and so I have a lot of trust in them. That's one thing. The second thing is, I think that the world at large is asking us for things that don't come in siloed school-based packages. As our schools increasingly are focused on solving problems in the world, problems aren't delivered as this is a design school problem or this is a public health school problem. Instead, it's a problem of people who have tuberculosis and need better shelter so that tuberculosis isn't spread as easily. And so the design school works with school public health to figure out what the answers to those problems are. And so as increasingly we see ourselves having a significant impact on the world, we look at it in a way that makes us want to draw on one another and also makes us want to be at Harvard because there's so many others to draw upon. Our undergraduates think very much in the same way. They want to do coursework that enables them to feel they can have an impact on the world. They have recently found that they are able to undertake a secondary field, which is like a minor in global health that's been introduced because of collaborations with our graduate schools in public health medicine and elsewhere, Kennedy School. They are interested in connecting to the design school and having work in architecture. We see our students again and again wanting this on the undergraduate level as well, and so we have resources in our graduate schools to enhance that. And so that's what makes me think we have a good shot at getting this done, because it's what people want.
Let me ask you about Harvard in the news. You have a professor working in the area of cognition and morality, who the university has acknowledged is solely responsible for 8 instances of scientific misconduct. Why, in an institution whose motto is Veritas, is that man still on the faculty?
Let me say that integrity is absolutely fundamental to everything we do, that indeed Veritas requires it as we pursue knowledge. And it's so important to us that we have quite developed, elaborate processes of addressing allegations of misconduct. These processes rest with the faculty because we believe that and know that in order to understand research misconduct, an investigation has to involve people, depend on people who understand the protocols of that research so as to know when those protocols have been abandoned or overturned. So that's one reason for a faculty process. A second is as a guarantee of academic freedom, because it means that a faculty member will be judged by peers and that a process will not be instituted or instigated because an individual has had an unpopular political view or said something rude about the president. So we believe very firmly in this faculty process, and we have a process that we have undertaken, and that process still has some parts to continue because it involved federal funds. There's continuing investigation about that.
I saw, I believe in the university statement, you correct me if I'm wrong, a list of possible sanctions that could be brought in this instance. And as I read it, separation from the university is not one of them.
Separation from the university involves a process that we at Harvard call a third statute process, which is a faculty-based process, and it indeed is a process that can be used in instances of scientific or research misconduct.
It can be. Mm-hmm. Would someone who falsified their academic credentials in order to get a job here remain on the faculty?
This would go through a process that would evaluate the severity, the appropriate sanctions, and after a finding was arrived at of what the particular allegations were, then there could be a decision to undertake a third statute process or not.
As somebody who comes from the news business, and I look at this as a reporter, mm-hmm. The silence from the university, other than that statement about solely responsible for 8 instances of scientific mm-hmm. Misconduct, the silence from the university has been somewhat deafening. And I know there have been many people who have called for greater transparency of the university processes in this instance, and I know there are individual rights that are involved, but to withhold information or how this is going, does that not call in question the reputation of the university's research integrity? And that can have real dollar implications.
Well, dollar implications, but I think any kind of challenge to our fundamental commitment to integrity has far more profound implications than just dollars. So I just want to emphasize that integrity should not just immediately translate into dollar implications. You were asking about transparency, about confidentiality. Customarily, these processes of investigation of research misconduct have been confidential in nature. This has the custom as well of our peer institutions. We have made public only customarily what was necessary in order to introduce whatever sanctions are imposed. And we've also felt a real need to be careful about what is revealed because of when there are ongoing federal processes through the Office of Research Integrity, because it's important not to taint those processes. We have also moved to kind of undermine confidentiality or to depart from confidentiality in order to correct the scientific record. So that's been another concern that has led to some departure from those customary positions. In this instance, we said more than we ever have, announcing that there were indeed findings. That was unprecedented. I think that there may be a reason to ask ourselves, what is the appropriate level of confidentiality for such cases? And as you may know from reading the various materials that were issued to the press, the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, Mike Smith, indicated the desire to bring together a committee to ask about our procedures, which, as I said, are very much like those of our peers. We will have such a committee, but we think we want to do it at the university level, and the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences thinks that's appropriate as well. So as we look at what has happened in this case, we have questions, you have questions, and we would like to address those. But what we have done is follow a process that has been in place and that is very much like those at other institutions.
One other question. This Saturday, this university is going to honor with a fellowship a man who has written words that are viewed by many as highly prejudiced against Muslims, and he has a history of anti-Arab and anti-Muslim writings. Why does Harvard honor a man with such opinions?
I spoke at morning prayers just about 2 weeks ago on the first day of class, and I spoke about belonging and about how important it is for us to make sure that everybody at Harvard feels that they belong and that Harvard belongs to them. Martin Peretz's comments struck a very different chord and suggested that there are people who don't belong or people who are not valued or whose lives may not be valued in the same way as other people's. And this has been very hurtful to many in our community. It is also something very much at odds with the fundamental values that we wish to embrace as a university that, as I have said a couple of times already in our conversation, are rooted in notions of inclusion and of bringing people together from different cultures, different environments, different beliefs. Professor Peretz himself has recognized what he called the wild and wounding nature of his words. And in a blog post on the eve of Yom Kippur, he wrote about how he would spend part of his emphasis or inquiry into forgiveness as part of that Day of Atonement, thinking about the meaning of these words in the context of that day. This scrutiny of Martin Peretz's words has come at the same time as a planned celebration, long-planned celebration for the social studies program at Harvard. It's their 50th anniversary. And there are individuals in that who were graduates of that program who wish to raise money to support undergraduate research. And they have done so, and there are a number among them who are students of Martin Peretz's. He has taught in the program for many years. And these individuals wished to recognize the ways in which he contributed as a teacher to their lives, to helping them write a senior thesis, to helping them write an application for Rhodes that they won, to helping them launch a career in journalism. And so it was their wish to both contribute to undergraduate research and to recognize the importance of engaged teaching. That wish seems to us an entirely appropriate basis for a donor gift, and that therefore the gift will proceed. And we are very glad to have a recognition of both undergraduate research and an affirmation of the importance of teaching.
A couple of years ago, if I'm correct, the university turned down a rather large gift from the president of the United Arab Emirates.
No.
No,
It's
wrong.
not correct.
Wrong.
Wrong.
Why am I wrong? Hate to be wrong.
There was a gift that the donor requested to be returned. We did not turn down a gift.
Okay. So let me be clear in the Peretz case. You you parse a difference here between the wishes of the students who honor him and try to distinguish that from the university separating itself from his words?
I think both things, both and.
Okay. Reading your speeches about the role of education and universities facing irreconcilable demands to be practical and to be transcendent. Have we veered too much, particularly in these economic times, to the practical?
I've emphasized in my speeches and writings over the past year and a half, 2 years, that we must not allow the demands of these economic times to erase our sense of the larger purposes of education, even as we note how much knowledge, universities, education are going to be a part of recovery and of economic growth. We need to emphasize simultaneously how important it is that we have larger purposes for education, because this is a time not simply of a need for economic growth. It's also a time for a need to interrogate our purposes as citizens of the United States and citizens of the world, to ask ourselves whether we have been critical enough of things we've taken for granted, to ask ourselves what are our values, what matters most to us. And I believe that the liberal arts, that the big picture, that the long view that universities represent have an irreplaceable role in that. And now more than ever, even as we need the economic contributions of universities more than ever, we need that big picture more than ever.
Does it worry you at all, and this is a personal observation, that maybe Harvard and sister institutions, peer institutions, are turning out too many students who are veering to the practical? I see an awful lot of kids who are want to go to Wall Street, want to go to the hedge funds, want to go to the venture capital companies. And those companies are producing jobs and they are driving the economy, but I'm not sure that's what's in the mind of these kids. I have a feeling that they want to go there because they can be very personally lucrative, those jobs.
I've talked a lot about this, and one of the venues in which I have enjoyed doing so has been my baccalaureate addresses, which I give to the graduating seniors each year. And the first year I was president, which was before the economic downturn, students kept coming up to me and saying, why are we all going to Wall Street? And I found that such a curious question. So they're all going to Wall Street, but why are they asking me about it? And that seemed to me to bespeak a certain ill ease with their own choices. And so I've tried to explore that ill ease with them through darkness and storm and economic turmoil, and ask, what do you want in your lives? And how do you live a meaningful and fulfilling life? And one of the things I've tried to tell students is, if you're feeling coerced into going to Wall Street because you feel it's the only safe economic choice or it's the only prestigious choice, wait a minute. Do what you love. Go to the thing that you want to try out. And then make another choice if it turns out you can't support yourself, or you don't like it, or you don't make it in whatever realm you've endeavored to get into. And so I've seen a lot of that happen, partly by necessity, because the number of jobs on Wall Street declined, partly because, if I may be so bold, these students were asking me for permission. They were asking me to hold up a model, a valued model of alternatives, so that they could balance the Wall Street choice along with other choices. Last year, 20% of our senior class applied for Teach for America. And this fall, at a reception after freshman convocation, a student came up to me who graduated 2 years ago, who started off on Wall Street, decided, nope, I'm going to go play the saxophone and see if I can make it on the saxophone. And he partly blames me, credits me, we'll see how it turns out, for this decision. And so I checked back in with him. He was in Europe all summer. He's got a lot of gigs in New York. He's making it, but we'll see where he is in 10 years.
And final question from me. I saw in one of your speeches you said, part of me wants to be a student again. If you were coming to Harvard, what would you take?
Oh. I think about that so often. You were telling me the other night that you're taking first nights, right?
Yep.
You lucky dog. I would love to sit in on that. Evelyn Hammonds talked about the course trailers for Gen Ed. I've been looking at some of these course trailers. I would love to take pyramid schemes. Isn't that a class? Yes, pyramid schemes about ancient Egypt. I would love to
I thought I told you how to create a Ponzi scheme. I didn't know. I thought you were headed for Wall Street.
No. I would love to take more science than I ever had as an undergraduate history major. So lots of things. Doug Melton came and taught me a specialized course on stem cell science when I was first named as president. I thought that was wonderful, and I'd love to do more of that. So just an unparalleled feast here.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We're going to try an experiment now with projecting some of the questions that have come in, I hope have come in, from you in the audience and from people over the internet. I don't know who to ask if we're all set with that. Can we project
one?
Here we go. Oh boy. Recently you drafted a letter to Congress in support of the DREAM Act. Oh boy, this doesn't work. What do you hope the legislation will accomplish, and what effect do you think it'll have on Harvard's future?
Thank you, Matthew Beck, for that question. I was in Washington. Is that you? Hi. I was in Washington last week and had the privilege of going with Eric Balderas, who you all, I think, will remember was detained last spring because he is undocumented. Went with him to thank Senator Durbin for all Senator Durbin's efforts on behalf of the DREAM Act. And that act is going onto the floor today, maybe? I'm not sure, this week. And so we've been working very hard to make the case for the DREAM Act. For me, the case for the DREAM Act is just what we've been talking about for the last half hour, which is opportunity for students of talent who want to make a contribution to this country and who, through no choice of their own, were brought here undocumented as young children, have excelled ever since, are now at places like Harvard and Princeton and Stanford, and want to be able to use their degrees in education to make a better world. And I think that's something we should embrace. Another part of the DREAM Act enables students, undocumented individuals, to choose military service, which they can't do now either. So another way of making a contribution. And when we have these extraordinary young people who want to make a better world for us, I think we ought to cheer that and pass the DREAM Act to make it possible.
This was an issue at Princeton a couple of years ago. We had a young man, I think was the salutatorian of the class, and he had a chance to go to Oxford, and if he went, he couldn't come back. It was a very difficult situation. Let's see the next question. The cost of a four-year undergraduate degree, tuition, room and board, and fees at Harvard and its peer higher education institutions is topping $200,000 today and quickly heading to $250,000. What can institutions of higher education do to make a quality college degree more cost accessible to more American families? What disruptive transformations do you expect to see in higher education that may change the situation?
This is a very interesting question. I mean, there are really two parts here. What we are doing here at Harvard to make education more cost accessible is what we described when I talked about our financial aid policies and the way it is keyed to attracting and supporting lower and middle income families, with our commitment to families up to $180,000 of income not paying any more than 10% of their income, and families under $60,000 paying nothing at all. So that is Harvard's response to the cost of higher education. But you're asking a bigger question as well, which is about the entire higher education sector. And the United States has just excelled in building such a sector, and it has been costly. And I think now we have challenges to ask ourselves, what do we want higher education to do and be, and how do we figure out ways to make it accessible, not just to the 1,670 students who arrive as freshmen at Harvard every year, but to the wider range of Americans who may want to go to community colleges, who would seek to go to public institutions of higher education, and so forth. I think one of the elements of this is that the federal government must sustain and state governments must sustain their commitments to higher education. We've seen real reductions in support for our very strong public institutions. California, the kind of treasure of public higher education, has suffered enormous cuts, 25% cuts.
They can't maintain that support given the situation. The dire circumstances that state budgets are in, it's just something that, unfortunately, it's a cut that comes.
But there are questions to ask about when you cut education, what does that do ultimately for economic growth? Is that an economically efficient thing to do? To put people in a situation where they're less likely. Today in the New York Times, there was an article about the differential in income between those who graduate from college and those who do not. And it's substantial. So when you deny college education to a substantial portion of the population, you're decreasing their earning potential. We've also seen big gaps between levels of unemployment among those who are college educated and those who are not during the downturn.
Sure, the people who are college educated make, what, 75% more than over a lifetime than people who are not. But then you look at the state of New York, there's just something in the New York Times today, a third of their budget is now going to Medicaid. That's something that they cannot do anything about. There are so many fixed costs in state budgets. Education is not.
I think we need to ask about where our priorities lie as we look at taxing levels, as we look at the cost of education and the cost of ignorance. I think there's another set of questions too, which is how can education be more cost effective, and how can we work to contain costs and to ask the kinds of questions that we have been confronted with because of the economic downturn, but that I think now have to be regular questions for us. What can we do without? What are our necessities? And how do we understand those imperatives?
Next question. In your dream of dreams, what will Harvard look like in the middle of this century? And what will it take? You can still be here? and what will it take from all corners of the university, both in Cambridge and around the globe, for us, presuming that means the Harvard community, to make that happen?
Well, in the middle of the century, let's see. Charles William Eliot served for 40 years, so I want to outdo him. So I just, you know, Stephen Wright, one of my favorite comedians, said, "It is my intention to live forever." So far, so good. Great line. Great line. I've talked a little bit about what Harvard will look like in terms of who will be here and how we'll interact with one another. This notion of boundaries, this notion of bringing in people regardless of their economic circumstances, where they're from, talent, bringing people together, coming together across boundaries within Harvard, breaking down the boundary of the Charles River as we integrate more fully with the business school, but also think about Alston and the future. So that will be an important part of what Harvard will look like in the middle of this century. But I also have dreams that involve some of the kinds of spaces and opportunities even with our existing physical structures. And so if you mean look like as literally look like, one of the things that means a lot to me is moving towards more, and you've talked about this, common spaces at Harvard, of taking something like Holyoke Center and seeing if we can make that a kind of core space for the campus. And so having people be able to come together in more common spaces of the campus as well. So that's another dream I have about what Harvard physically will look like. It does strike me as an outsider coming here, there's no student center for the undergraduates. Let's get one up. We'll do that. Next question. Whoa! In the light of the financial challenges Harvard and our country has been experiencing over the last 2 years, resulting in some program eliminations or reshaping, employee layoffs, and no or minimal salary increases, et cetera, employees may be feeling a bit demoralized and possibly disenfranchised here and across the country. From your perspective and in consideration of the current fiscal environment, this person's a Harvard writer, it's long. From your perspective and in consideration of the current financial environment, what do you feel Harvard could and should be doing in order to recruit and retain the most highly motivated
and engaged workforce?
I think that a big part of what motivates people at Harvard is feeling part of the mission and thinking that there may be other places to work that would have certain kinds of advantages, but feeling that you are part of an enterprise that can make a difference in the world, that sees the expansion of people's brains and capacities and aspirations going on in front of you every day. That's a big part of what I think should motivate everybody who's here, the staff, the faculty, the students themselves. And so I think that feeling that you are doing something important is one of the most significant parts of making a job meaningful. So how can we connect people to one another so they feel that they understand the mission, that they see it happening before their eyes? All of that, I think, must go with, of course, the basic realities of good pay, good working conditions, our excellent benefits, and all of those things that we wish to support. But I hope we can really tie people to what I see as a very inspirational set of purposes.
We'll take a few more. Next one. Oh, good. Are there measures your office is taking to ensure the Extension School is an integral part of the greater Harvard community?
I'm very excited about things going on in the Extension School where experiments and distance learning are being undertaken, where a lot of experimental teaching is going on, where individuals from the community and the wider world are being engaged with the universities. So yes, I think that the Extension School is a critical part of the university and something that will be even more critical as universities think about a big question, which is, who do we teach? When there was a question about, is there going to be a change in the model, a disruptive element of how higher education thinks about itself in the future? One of the things on my mind is that issue of who we teach. Is it just 18 to 21-year-olds, and then graduate students, and then some executive ed for people in continuing careers? Or are we going to redefine the notion of education so it's for all of life in a more general way? And I would bet that 100 years from now, universities are going to be extended in ways they haven't been, and that the people being taught are going to be from a much broader age range and in very more varied circumstances than what we see today.
You've talked about in the past about the larger and larger percentage of Americans who are getting higher education and young people. Mm-hmm. I've forgotten the figures, but you said at the beginning of the century it was under 5%. The beginning of the last century it was under 5%. Mm-hmm. It's now up where?
What is it? It's 50s, I think.
I think in the 50 to 60% range. So what does that do to Harvard? You know, as there's expansions of things like online universities and the growing community college movement, et cetera. How does that change the mission of Harvard, and does it have an effect? Does it make Harvard less or more important?
It's interesting. I would say I wouldn't look at it as more or less important, but rather a part of a network of education that needs to be integrated so that we understand different institutions do different things and different individuals need different things at different times in their lives. So how do we look at higher education as a whole and put those pieces together in a way that gives students choices, gives them the kind of education that they need at the time that they're looking for it. I don't think Harvard is going to become less important. What we've seen in recent years is this we've seen essentially a doubling of our number of applicants since the mid-90s. We had 30,000 applicants for our freshman class this year. So the college is increasingly a focus and a target of attention. But we've also seen a great increase in our graduate schools in the numbers of students applying and the desire for higher education. I think when you and I graduated from college, which was more or less the same time.
I won't tell if you don't tell.
Everyone knows everything about me, my age, my height, you know, it's not.
Keep it under your hat.
Some people went to graduate school from our classes at Princeton and at Bryn Mawr, but not everyone did. Now an enormous percentage of students go on. And so I think the demand for professional education, additional education beyond the first degree has increased. So that makes Harvard even more in demand, but I think it also puts Harvard in a different set of relationships to the other choices that are available to people.
I tried to go to graduate school, but those damn Yaleys turned me down. Let's go to the next one. Could you please offer those of us involved in cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary study the pieces of advice you would offer yourself when you were on the first steps of your journey that saw you finally arriving here as the first woman president of Harvard University?
Well, I never knew I was on a journey to arrive as the first woman president of Harvard University. I'm wondering if you ask this question about those who are involved in cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary study because you know that my PhD is actually in a cross-disciplinary field. So I'll just say that my PhD is in American civilization, so my interdisciplinary roots are old and deep. My advice about anybody who's going through contemplation of a career and a path is to be fully where you are, to not always be thinking, I want to be in that next place. I say that partly as a product of a generation of women who would have been called demented if they'd said they wanted to be president of Harvard. It would have been crazy for me to have such an ambition. I would not have been allowed in the undergraduate library had I been an undergraduate at Radcliffe during the years that I spent at Bryn Mawr. And so, almost as a necessity, I had to fully engage with whatever I was doing at a particular time and to say, this is what I am and what I'm committing myself to, instead of always having one eye off on some other aspiration that diminished the importance of what I was doing in the moment. So I guess maybe this is more philosophical than you hoped for in posing this question. But I'd say engage your life where you are and exploit its opportunities, and those will move you along and open windows for you as you move towards the next ones.
I think it's appropriate on a personal note, with some personal thoughts like that we conclude. Drew Gilpin Faust, thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for being here today.